who had been at the camp where Elvis Presley is, and he said that Elvis Presley has made the greatest impression.
Elvis Presley is remembered as one of the most influential figures in music history. But in the early days of his career, he clashed head-on with America's cultural gatekeepers. Mortified by his so-called indecent movements, powerful voices in conservative circles called for him to be removed from television altogether. The controversy would culminate in a defining moment that threatened to cut his career trajectory short before it truly began. This pivotal episode wasn't just about Elvis. It revealed the deep cultural tensions of 1950s America as traditional values collided with the bold energy of a rising youth culture. So, what happened on the day Elvis was almost banned from television, and how did he manage to overcome the backlash? Let's find out. From the moment Elvis Presley stepped in front of television cameras, his performances were met with both adoration and outrage. His early appearances, including one on Stage Show in early 1956, showcased his music to a national audience. However, it wasn't until his infamous performance on The Milton Berle Show on June 5, 1956, that the backlash reached its peak. During this now iconic performance, Elvis sang Hound Dog with a slower, bluesier tempo and exaggerated his hip movements, much to the delight of screaming teenagers in the audience. Yet, to many parents, critics, and conservative leaders, it was nothing less than scandalous. Elvis's gyrations were deemed vulgar and immoral, and the appearance resulted in a wave of public criticism. Jack Gould, a prominent television critic for the New York Times, published a harsh review of Elvis's performance, stating, "Mr. Presley has no discernible singing ability. His phrasing, if it can be called that, consists of the stereotyped variations that go with a beginner's area in a bathtub. For the ear, he is an unutterable bore. For the eye, he is a little short of a national disgrace." The backlash didn't stop there. Conservative groups, including religious organizations, began calling Elvis a corrupting influence on America's youth, claiming his movements were overtly sexual and his music promoted delinquency. Preachers spoke out against him from their pulpits. Even local governments began to question if his concerts should be allowed. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, tried to manage the situation by downplaying the outcry, but even he could not ignore how quickly the criticism was escalating. Television producers on other shows became cautious about booking Elvis, fearing advertiser backlash and the growing public scrutiny. The pressure was mounting, and the question loomed: was Elvis Presley too controversial for television? This moment in Presley's career made it clear that while his popularity had skyrocketed among the younger generation, he was stepping on a cultural fault line that could jeopardize his ability to appear on America's most powerful entertainment medium. The growing controversy surrounding Elvis Presley didn't just ignite public outrage. It also caused a significant rift within the television industry. With large sponsors acting as the financial lifeline for TV productions, their concerns carried weight. Many were apprehensive about being associated with an act that some labeled as indecent. As the backlash escalated, major networks began to question whether featuring Elvis on primetime television was worth the risk. CBS was one such network grappling with this dilemma. Behind closed doors, executives weighed public reactions against the undeniable viewership ratings Presley brought in. Sponsors like the Chesterfield Cigarette Company reportedly expressed hesitation about continuing their partnerships with shows that featured him, citing fears of alienating their more conservative consumer base. Steve Allen, host of The Steve Allen Show, was among those who sought to avoid direct confrontation with the controversy. When he booked Elvis for his show in July 1956, Allen opted for a more controlled approach, presenting Presley as a comedic act, rather than the electrifying performer viewers had come to expect. Elvis, wearing a tuxedo, was asked to sing Hound Dog to a literal basset hound on stage, an attempt to downplay the perceived sensuality of his movements. Reflecting on this performance, Steve Allen later said, "We wanted to showcase him in a way that would be acceptable to all audiences. But I don't think Elvis was especially thrilled about it. He agreed to do it, though, because he understood the importance of making television appearances. While this strategy may have temporarily quelled critics, it also frustrated some of Elvis's fans, who saw it as an attempt to sanitize his persona. Producers of shows like The Ed Sullivan Show watched closely, hoping to gauge whether Elvis was still profitable enough to justify the potential backlash. Sullivan himself had initially declared that Elvis would never appear on his program, famously stating, "I just don't think he's appropriate for family viewing." This balancing act between managing negative publicity and taking advantage of Elvis's undeniable popularity left networks and sponsors in a state of high tension. They were caught between skyrocketing ratings and the possibility of alienating their conservative audience base, a gamble few were willing to take without serious reconsideration. As the controversy surrounding Elvis Presley grew, few would have expected Ed Sullivan would reverse his initial stance. Sullivan had famously declared that Elvis would never appear on The Ed Sullivan Show. Yet, just months later, he not only changed his position, but became instrumental in propelling Elvis's career further into the spotlight. The turnaround was largely driven by numbers. Elvis's appearance on The Steve Allen Show, despite its stiff and sanitized presentation, brought in massive viewership ratings, outperforming Sullivan's show that same night. With such undeniable popularity, Sullivan faced mounting pressure to capitalize on Elvis's appeal before rival shows fully claimed him. Sullivan reluctantly booked Elvis for 3 appearances, reportedly securing a deal for $50,000, a record-breaking amount at the time for a performer. Behind the scenes, however, there were conditions. Sullivan and his production team maintained strict guidelines to avoid further public outcry. Elvis would only be filmed from the waist up during his performances, ensuring that his controversial hip movements wouldn't be visible to viewers. Producer Marlo Lewis, who worked on the show, later commented on these precautions. "Ed knew it was a gamble. We had to make sure Elvis wouldn't cross any lines on air, but we couldn't completely suppress what made him popular. That was the challenge." When asked about collaborating with Sullivan, Elvis approached the opportunity diplomatically. In a press interview leading up to his debut, he addressed the controversy surrounding his performances, saying, "I just try to do what I feel. People can make of it what they want." Despite the public restrictions, Sullivan knew he couldn't ignore Elvis's raw magnetism. On September 9, 1956, Elvis made his first appearance on Sullivan's show, and over 60 million viewers, an astounding 82.6% of the television-watching audience, tuned in. Although certain elements of his act were toned down, his charisma shone through, securing his status not just as a rock and roll star, but as a cultural icon. Sullivan, ever a pragmatist, later reflected on his decision. "The kid's all right, he's nothing to get upset about," Sullivan famously said after the performance, softening his earlier critiques and cementing Elvis as a repeat guest on his show. However, the network's cautious censorship revealed the continued friction between public taste, cultural norms, and the shifting landscape of entertainment. Elvis Presley's first appearance on The Sullivan Show on September 9, 1956, was one of the most anticipated television events of the decade. Despite the network's precautions, including the much-discussed decision to film him from the waist up, the performance became a cultural milestone. It wasn't just a test of Elvis's ability to appeal to a cautious national audience. It was a pivotal moment in the clash between conservative values and the rising influence of youth culture. The night included performances of Don't Be Cruel, Love Me Tender, Ready Teddy, and Hound Dog. Even with the strategically limited camera angles, viewers could feel the energy Elvis brought to the stage. As Jack Gould of the New York Times had previously criticized him, Elvis's stage presence remained unapologetically bold, leaving little doubt about his star power despite attempts to control his image. Behind the scenes, producers nervously monitored the response to his performance. Television critic Ben Gross from the New York Daily News recalled tensions within the production team. "We knew the camera restrictions wouldn't stop the backlash, but there was no way to dull the impact of Presley's personality. That was what really captivated people." When asked about the waist-up limitation, Elvis reportedly shrugged it off, saying, "I don't care what they do as long as they let me sing." However, the decision to censor parts of his act drew criticism from his fans, who felt it undermined the authenticity that made him so compelling. The public response was enormous. Letters poured into CBS offices, with opinions sharply divided. Older viewers expressed relief that the lewd segments of his act had been omitted, while younger fans flooded the network with messages of support for Elvis, demanding his return to the stage. The conflict highlighted the generational shift that Elvis represented, a shift the conservative mainstream media was still struggling to keep up with. Even Ed Sullivan, who had initially distanced himself from Elvis, acknowledged the undeniable impact of the performance. Afterward, he reportedly proclaimed, "Elvis Presley is a real decent fine boy. We've never had a pleasanter experience with a big name." This marked a clear shift in his public stance, though it was as much about reputation management as it was about praising Presley. Ultimately, the broadcast's enormous ratings, reportedly reaching an 82.6% share of the television audience, made it clear that despite the controversy, Elvis was an unstoppable force. The waist-up censorship may have momentarily appeased his detractors, but it couldn't suppress the energy and cultural shift driving his meteoric rise. For Elvis, this performance proved to be a defining moment that solidified both his stardom and his role as a symbol of a generation ready to challenge the norms of the past. Elvis Presley's censored appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show didn't just attract record audiences, it also highlighted deeper societal tensions at play in 1950s America. This was more than a debate over a musician's performance. It was a reflection of a cultural shift that was causing divisions across age groups, regions, and social classes. For conservative America, Elvis symbolized the growing threat of the unknown. His music, influenced by African-American rhythms and styles, was seen by some as a challenge to traditional white middle-class values. The controversy surrounding his performances wasn't just about his movements or lyrics, but also about what he represented: a blending of racial influences, a rejection of traditional authority, and a growing independence among the youth. Media and cultural commentators began to analyze his impact more critically. Sociology professor Wilbur Schramm suggested that the intensity of the public reaction to Elvis revealed a fear that the younger generation, exposed to new cultural influences, might reject the values of their parents. This generational divide became starkly visible in the reactions to Presley's performances. Despite the backlash, network executives soon realized that this cultural shift was not slowing down. Advertisers, though initially hesitant, began to see the commercial potential of aligning themselves with youth culture. Elvis's popularity demonstrated that young people were a lucrative audience, shaping how television and advertising adapted in the years to come. The controversy also exposed the limits of censorship. Even though waist-up filming was enforced during his Ed Sullivan Show appearances, the effort did little to diminish his rising fame. In fact, the restriction itself became a talking point, and the widespread discussion only added to Elvis's mystique. As television critics noted, censorship could not control the broader cultural forces that artists like Elvis embodied. For Elvis himself, this period marked a permanent shift in how he was perceived, not just as a musician, but as a cultural disruptor. While he often avoided engaging with the political and cultural debates surrounding his work, his very existence in the spotlight forced America to confront changes it could no longer ignore. The legacy of these appearances extended beyond Presley's career. They set the stage for future artists to push boundaries on television. By the 1960s, performers like the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and others would continue to challenge conventions in ways that mirrored Elvis's early controversy. The backlash he endured became a blueprint for navigating the tension between artistic expression and societal norms. In the end, Elvis Presley's battle with television censorship revealed more about the culture of mid-century America than it did about the performer himself. It was a pivotal moment in the evolution of media, entertainment, and social values, one that would have repercussions for decades to come.